Yesterday we were looking at the ark, considering the dimensions of the ark, what it may have looked like. I related to you a story that a person who, as a child, was at the ark, saw it, and described it as is given here. Here's another artist rendering. It's very similar to the one before that. You can see that it's rather box-like, rectangular, and there are windows at the top. That's how that artist interprets the instructions given to Noah. The size of the ark is like this compared to other ships. You can see it's 450 feet long. There's some of the dimensions of it you can see. Here's the Titanic. It was somewhat longer, almost twice as long as the ark. Here's some other large ships in comparison. So here's the ark. Here's some other ships that are larger than that, but a pretty large vessel. Now, one of the things that's very interesting about the structure of the ark, for one thing, it doesn't look like a boat, does it? No. And there, if you look at the ark, how many of you have been to the ark in Kentucky? All right, you'll see that they have kind of given a little bit of an edge to the front of the boat, indicating that it may be mobile that way. But largely, the ark was not designed to go anywhere, right? It was designed to do what? Float, right? Somebody had access a number of years ago to the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla, California. And this is a huge tank that is used to put replicas of a ship that's been engineered to see whether it will withstand storms before they actually build it. They want to make sure it's going to work. And so they're able to reproduce hurricanes, tidal waves, all kinds of things in this tank with models to indicate the reliability of that vessel. Somebody decided, I wonder what it would be like if we put a replica of the ark in this. I wonder how it would fare. Well, they found that the waves that they gave to this ark model was much larger than ever would be experienced in the ocean, and they could not capsize it. It would not capsize. It proved capable of righting itself even to 90 degrees. That's unheard of with any ocean-going vessel. Most vessels will develop severe stability problems at more than a 60-degree list. The ratio of the ark is 30 by 5 by 3, which turns out to be a perfect design to prevent capsizing in rough seas. So it was designed perfectly. There were problems, however, on board the ark. For example, if they sing "Row, row, row your boat" one more time, I'm jumping ship. And Noah had the constant issue, who's going to clean up the mess in the bottom of this boat? But I'm sure that all worked out. Maybe they used the mess in the bottom of the boat to fertilize the first gardens. Could be. Let's go back to our timeline and see where we are. Let's see. Do you remember what color Noah was?
I think here's the
Is he this one? Well, anyway, following that time period, we have mentioned by way of Heber, Peleg. This is where the Tower of Babel takes place then, is here, sometime after the flood. Here's some other people after that, and then the foundation of Egypt, which we'll get to eventually here. And then we have Terah, the father of Abraham, appearing on the scene here. And we see that Noah is still alive then, when Terah was on the scene. All right, so the next thing we'll look at is the Tower of Babel. So open your Bibles to Genesis once again. And we're looking at chapter 11 now. Genesis chapter 11. All right. How many of you have remember hearing maybe a Sunday school teacher or pastor, or maybe here in a Christian school, somebody talking about the Tower of Babel. And almost everybody's heard of the Tower of Babel, all right? Let me ask you this. What were you told was the reason why they were building the Tower of Babel? What was the reason?
Because they were trying to reach God.
They're trying to reach God. How many heard that that was the reason? Okay, almost unanimous. Let's look at the text and see if that's what it says. You see in verse 1, the whole earth had one language and the same words. So the vocabulary was the same. They spoke the same. The indication here is they even had the same accent. As people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. By the way, we'll talk about Shinar because that's where the first civilization develops. Interesting, it's right where the Bible said that people went, where at least a large group of people went. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." So we see that very early on, right after the flood, they knew how to make bricks. They knew how to bake them thoroughly so that they wouldn't deteriorate. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortars. They knew how to make mortar, sort of a tar-like substance that they put between the bricks to hold in place. So this was something that they did right away. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Where people get the idea that they were building this to reach God is because in the King James Version, it says, "Let us build a tower to heaven." And so they automatically think, oh, they're trying to get to God in heaven. But you notice the more modern translations translate it more accurately to say a tower which top reaches into the heavens. What's that talking about? The sky. So what are they saying? Let's build a really tall tower, right? That's all they're saying. Let's build a really tall tower. Now, it does give a reason for that. What's the reason why they want to build this really tall tower?
Make a name for themselves.
To make a name for themselves. What does that mean?
They want to be known.
They want to be well known. Oh, you're the guys that built that tower. Oh, you're from that place. You're from Babel. What other reason is given here as to why they're building a tower? There's something else. Jonas?
So they aren't dispersed.
So they aren't dispersed. What's that mean? What does it mean to be dispersed?
So they don't spread apart.
Exactly. Now, is there a problem with that? Let's look back at chapter 9. See if I put my finger on the verse here. Verse 7. What's it say in verse 7? Somebody read that for us.
And you, be fruitful and multiply. Increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it.
All right, so what's God saying to Noah?
Spread out.
Yeah, have lots of kids and spread out. Now, why would it be important, just from a rational perspective, what's logical, for God to want the people to spread out and not stay in one place? Kurt? Yeah, so they're the only ones that are there. So why should they just all stay together? Wouldn't that be safer? Why would he want them to spread out? What else is coming off the ark besides the people? Animals. What are they doing? What are the animals doing?
Taking up a lot of space.
On the ark?
On the
When they get off the ark, what are they doing? What would the animals naturally do once they got off the ark? Would they all hang around with the people? What would they do?
Spread out.
It would spread out, right? And in fact, they keep spreading from there all over the world. So that you've got animals very early making their way to what is today Australia. And at some point, Australia gets separated, becomes an island. And so the animals there develop differently than the other animals. Their adaptation occurs so that they are different animals that we find other places. Because that's where some of them went, and they didn't go anywhere else. So animals are spread all over the world. Why is it important that people also spread all over the world? Do you think? No? You know? I think you know it. No?
We're supposed to have dominion over here.
Ah, good. So if God told Adam that we're supposed to have dominion over the earth, over the animals, you can't do it if we're all standing here together, right? Good, good. Any other reasons? Well, what will happen to the world if humans stay in one place, but all the animals are going all over, and plants are starting to grow all over?
There'll be a shortage of like animals and food because they'll all be somewhere else. They'll be in one spot.
Okay, so if we're all together, it'll be harder and harder to feed everybody. Okay, what else? What else will happen? What happens to your backyard if nobody mows it for 3 months?
It gets overgrown.
What?
It gets overgrown.
Gets overgrown. Gets wild, right? Pretty soon you see maybe animals out there in your backyard you never saw before. Because now they've got high grass to go into. So that'll happen to the earth. If humans don't spread out, the earth will become all wild. And eventually that wildness will prevent humans from ever leaving that little spot. And they'll be stuck there. So God says spread out. Now these guys are saying we don't want to spread out. What's one reason why they might not want to spread out? And why they build a tall tower? How would a tall tower help them?
Well, they want to spread out because they want to keep the same language and the same culture.
Okay, well, they don't really know that there is any such thing as a different language, so they wouldn't really think about that. Culture may be a part of it. They want to keep their own way of doing things.
Safety. Safety.
How?
Like to protect themselves because they're all together.
Okay, so how would a tower help them with that?
Because they can stay in the tower. If there's like animal attack or something like that.
Okay, or if
Another flood.
another flood. Might they be concerned about that? Build a tall tower. That way, if there's another flood, we'll be safe. Now, why should that not have been a consideration?
Because God promised there wouldn't be another one.
Yeah. And how did he seal that promise? How did he show that promise? Yeah, the rainbow. Remember that? By the way, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but in the Hebrew, it's not called a rainbow. We call it that. I'm not sure about the translations. I can't remember if they do this or not. In Hebrew, it's just called a bow. And we call it a rainbow because we see it after it rains, right? But what else is a bow? Besides something you see in the sky, what is a bow?
You kind of like seal something. Like seal a Christmas present or someone's hair.
Oh, that kind of a bow. I wasn't thinking about that.
Oh.
Okay. What other kind of bow is there? Yeah, not a Christmas bow. That's not what I'm thinking.
Like a bow and arrow.
Yeah, and what would that be used for? Hunting, killing, attacking, warfare, right? So some have said that maybe the picture that God is putting here is that he is hanging up his bow on the wall. Like you hang up your bow, you're not going to use it anymore. And so he's putting a bow in the sky to show that he's not going to attack anymore. That could be. I don't know. Interesting anyway. But getting back to Babel. They don't want to scatter, partially maybe for safety. And they build a tower for safety, maybe from animals, maybe from another flood. But I think primarily so that they could always find their way back. Have you ever been somewhere where you might get lost, but you had a landmark you could look for? You ever been in a city and say, man, there's so many buildings, but I know if I can find my way back to that building, I'll know where I am. Or in the woods, maybe there's a certain tree, certain rock, right? What are you thinking of?
When you're in the woods and you're not too far, and you find this tree stand and you know how to get back.
Yeah. So that's what the tower may have been for them. They say even no matter how far if we get away from the city, we can always find our way back because we can see that tower. So it was that kind of security for them too. But the main thing is that was being disobedient. That was not doing what God had told them to do.
Does anyone know where this probably was?
Yeah, probably. And I think I'll probably, we'll be showing you that sometime soon. If I don't end up coming back to that, remind me. So what does God do? He does, they're being disobedient, and so sometimes God has to force obedience. Have you ever discovered that? Sometimes if we're not obedient, He engineers things, puts us in a position where we have to, and we see this throughout the Bible as well. So what does He do in order to get them to do what He wanted them to do? What does God do? Yeah, He changed all their languages. So they went to bed one night, they could understand each other perfectly, and they get up the next morning and they start to talk, and what do you say? I have no idea what you're saying. Can you imagine that? That'd be pretty funny in a way, wouldn't it? So He changed all their languages. So then what happened? People that, pretty soon you find out who's talking the same language you are. And so you start hanging around them, right? If you were in a foreign country, how many of you have ever been into a foreign country? Right? Anybody been in a foreign country where you were the only one speaking English? Where were you? Japan? You were someplace?
I was in Belize, but most people spoke English.
Yeah. In Japan, that would be because most people don't speak English in Japan, unlike a lot of countries in the world. So what happens if you're in Japan and all these people don't speak English, but you find somebody that speaks English? Did you find anybody? So your uncle. So if you find somebody who speaks English, what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, nice seeing you, so long. Is that what you would do?
You're staying with me.
Yeah, you're going to hang around them, right? Because it's familiar. And that's what happened after the confusion of the languages. These people stuck together who spoke the same language and actually moved away. They moved away into their own areas. And here we're told in the Bible who these people were, who their descendants were, and where they lived. So here's the dispersal of the nations. You can see, and the Tower of Babel would have been right in this area. And so some people went further north. You see Gomer is mentioned here, Magog, Meshech, Elam over this way, Asher, who was the father of the Assyrians. We have these different people here. There's Put, Mizraim, which becomes Egypt. Cush down here becomes Ethiopia. So you can see that they start scattering around. Here's a wider perspective. You can see where some of them are living. So this is the initial settlement of Noah's descendants as they begin to spread. Now, if you think about the Tower of Babel, we should think of it as a symbol of disobedience against God, right? And how God had to intervene to force obedience. What's interesting to me is that I came across this, which became a stamp. I think this was either a stamp or a picture that they were going to put on a stamp for the European Union. Notice Europe, many tongues, one voice. What are they signifying here? Let's go back to the Tower of Babel. Let's have one voice. They're using a symbol which is a symbol of disobedience to God as their symbol of unity in the European Union. Astounding. And that's where we are today. Now, whenever we talk about these issues, and we talk about where people come from, a lot of times people have the question, well, where did the human races come from? Okay, I get the different languages maybe, but why are so many people different shades, different colors, if you will? Where did that come from? You know, we have pictured here, different people. Well, that happens the same way that animals that live in a certain area begin to look alike, because there are certain characteristics that are more conducive to certain environments. For example, if you put a bunch of black bears and some polar bears up in the Arctic area, which one's going to survive? The polar bears. So as animals began to disperse, bears that moved up into the area, God built into their DNA the ability to adapt to environment around them. It's an engineering feat by God, so that those bears that had an ability or propensity for white fur began to would live better than those that didn't, and they would be the ones that survived and continued to produce white fur. And of course, the same is true in the opposite way of black bears and brown bears and all the different kinds of bears. Well, people, it's the same thing. What you find is that the people that immigrated into Europe were sons of Japheth, one of the sons of Noah. And apparently, Japheth must have had a genetic makeup which had something in the DNA in which a lighter colored skin was dominant. And so the people that went up into Europe, they went up into Europe because lighter skinned people don't do well in the hot sun. Have any of you noticed that? Any of you, most of you are pretty light skinned. Any of you have trouble with sunburn? And especially if if you've got reddish hair or blonde hair, it seems like that's usually the case. Well, those are the kind of people that were descendants of Japheth. They went up north. Descendants of Ham, many of them went down into the south, into Africa. And Ham apparently had very dark skin, and so he passed that on to his descendants, and they did well in hot climates. Darker skin does better there. Lighter, brownish skin, they do fine right here in the middle. And I believe it was descendants of Japheth then going over to Asia. So all the Asians are of a similar background as the Europeans. Now, so what is skin color? Skin color is just how much melatonin there is in your body, in your skin. We all are colored. Just some have more color than others. We're all of one race. As you notice this, we are one race. There really are no separate races. That's an evolutionary way of looking at things. That's a Darwinist idea. We are one race. I was just talking to the Understand the Times class from Acts 17, where Paul was talking on Mars Hill to the Greek philosophers, and he pointed out to them that there is a God who created everything. He's the Lord over all heavens and earth, and that all people came from one race, or one blood, one man. All descendants of Adam, and all descendants of Noah. So the skin color means absolutely nothing. We're all of one race together. So that explains a little bit about the differences between different people and their skin color. Do you have any questions about anything I've said or anything I haven't said that you want to ask further about that? Yeah.
Do you think that, I don't know if this will be around long enough for this to happen, but if white people, if there's a bunch of white people living in really south and some black people living really north, do you think that they'll start to change again?
It has to be, that'll occur more readily if there's intermarriage between those that have lighter skin. For example, you see that in America. Most what we call black people in America are not nearly as black as black people in Africa. because in America there's been more intermarriage with lighter skinned people. And so black people in general have lighter skin. And if you go to some parts of Scandinavia, you'll find people are much lighter skinned than even most of you. So at this point, there needs to be, they're not going to change because of the environment, because of the climate. They're going to change because of intermarriage with those that have a lighter skin. And in fact, it's possible because of that for, you're familiar with the AB and the BA and the AA, all that genetic formulation that in which you have recessive genes and the stronger genes and all that, and how that can relate. I've seen pictures of families where one child was black, one child was white. Well, it's because of the dominant gene was there for one, but a recessive gene took over for the other one. In fact, I've even seen it with twins. But there has to be some input into the genetic makeup of a person to change them drastically in that way. So it's not, remember, it's not the environment that changes the animal or the person. It's the DNA structure within that adapts to the environment. And certain things are more easily adaptable. Some people think or have thought that there's a lot of genetic difference or DNA difference between people of different races, as they call it, but in reality, there's very little. Now, within a local ethnic group, the variation within that group can be 85%. That is, if we just took a group of people living in one area, there would be 85% difference between them. But when you look at all of mankind, that becomes severely less. So that if you look between different ethnic or religious group or linguistic groups, like two different Asian groups, there's only 9% difference between the two groups. And if you look at different races like Asian versus Caucasian, there's only 6% variation between those two races. And if you look at any particular two individuals, anywhere on the earth, you just pick out two individuals at random, it's about a 0.2% variation. That's why if you're looking for a kidney transplant, it doesn't matter what color skin the person has. If our races really were separate, then you wouldn't be able to cross over like that. But we're all human beings. We're all part of the human race, and therefore there is a very little difference between them. By the way, there's a lot of difference between humans and, let's say, apes, chimps, and so on. Even though many people try to portray that as we're very similar, but in reality it's not. All right, any questions? All right, for Monday, I have an assignment for you. I want you to use your books, and as you're reading, take notes in your outline, which I'll give you. The assignment is on the board, and it is to read and take notes on pages 19 to 21, only a couple pages. Now, in your notes, you're going to find that there are some parts that have brackets around it. You know what a bracket is? It's kind of, a square parentheses. If a part of your notes is in brackets, that means it's not in your textbook. It's something I'll be giving you in class. So just fill in whatever you find in pages 19 to 21 that will fit in your notes, but not in the brackets. All right, and you do not have your notes yet, correct? All right, I'll give them to you right now, and you can get started on that.